This program is brought to you by Emory University.
When I got laid off, it started a spiral effect of everything else. Not being able to pay my rent, not being able to afford food, not being able to take care of my child.
So my mom never made that much money, and my dad, he was working for the state, but he got in trouble and went to prison for 9 months. And during that time period, I knew definitely that we were poor.
Knowing what it's like to be homeless, and knowing that you're just, you're just a job loss away from going back to there.
I knew what my mom wanted to have more for us, but it was just more or less we had to deal with what we could get on a regular basis. It wasn't, I
don't know when my kids are going to eat, how I will be able to get diapers for my kids. I had people, how do you do it with 5 kids by yourself? I'm like, it's not an easy task.
My mom and them, they were all in prison, and I just couldn't really depend on anyone to take care of certain things for me, and I had to move out of my Section 8 housing. And for me, I didn't know exactly how I was going to get it done.
The depression, just feeling lost, feeling hopeless.
Around 08, that's when the Fannie Mae and all that, the house market crashed and everything came to a gridlock. And at that point, not just me, others, we was thinking, what should we do now?
You saving a bone and you're putting water and making it broth because you don't have anything to eat and nowhere to go to get it. That feeling right there is the worst feeling you can ever have.
I feel like money makes the world go round, and if you don't have money, you're out of options. There's only so much that the government and charity places can do for you.
When you know that you have the ability, the mental capacity, that burning desire, that bulldog tenacity that's deep within you to be successful and to go out there and no matter what, I'm going to make it. And you're just in a situation where you can't do that.
Once you are the individual and you're out there, before things happen, it's the people that you have surrounded around you. If you hang around eagles, you'll soar. If you hang around buzzards, you're going to eat roadkill.
I have held on every single day, even when I was a little kid.
And I sing because I'm free.
Whatever God, has in my path, I ask that He bless me with enough to be able to help and see other people smile, to be able to help my family, to be able to help other women that going through the stuff that I go through, just to see a smile on their face.
Good evening. I'm Mark Becker, the president of Georgia State University, and I think we can all agree that that was a very poignant video. Well, you need to know that right down in front here tonight, we have with us a few of the people that you just saw in that video. They're here because they want to be part of this conversation. They want to be part of finding ways to lift our communities out of poverty. And I ask that you would stand so that we may welcome you to this conversation and recognize you. Please. Thank you. Well, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the historic Rialto Center for the Arts in Georgia State University. Because we host so much programming at this venue that is international and culturally diverse, we like to say that the Rialto is where Atlanta meets the world. Tonight, Atlanta comes to the Rialto for a different conversation, a conversation about today's other America living in poverty. And I know we're all very much looking forward to that conversation. So on behalf of the 32,000 students, roughly 1,500 faculty, and the thousands of staff that work at this university, on behalf of the Rialto Center for the Arts, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our house. And at this time, it is my privilege to introduce your moderator for the night, CNN Dialogue's Poppy Harlow.
Welcome. Okay, can everyone hear me? I can hear myself, so everyone can hear me. Thanks a lot for coming out tonight. I was really honored when my boss, Susan Grant, asked me to host this panel, and the reason is because it's something that I've gotten to report on a lot. I'm a business reporter, and a lot of times that means Wall Street, and that means the big banks and corporations, but to me it means you. It means all of you. It means Main Street America. And I've seen a pretty unbelievable thing, and that is the new poor in this country and the forgotten. And I think that's what we're here to talk about tonight. The numbers show us what's going on. 46 million Americans in poverty, 15% of this country, so many children, a city like Atlanta struggling, Detroit, 54% of kids in Detroit, 54% live in poverty, and to me, that's not okay. So I've had a chance to sit with families for days on end and see what they're going through, and look at families that look like your typical family from middle America. They're dressed well. You can't tell they're living in poverty, and every day is a struggle. They're trying to feed their family. They're going to the food bank when before they used to donate to the food bank. So you're seeing a huge shift, and I think it's a huge crisis that we have to address. So it's an honor for me to be here today, and we've got the experts. I'm just going to lead the conversation, and I want to bring the experts out. First, we have Donna Beagle. Donna, come on out. Donna is the founder of Communications Across Barriers. Donna's story is great. She's going to share it with you. She grew up in poverty, 28 years. Education brought her out, and she wrote a great op-ed today on CNN.com, and it said, "Poverty is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. It's not a Catholic or a Mormon issue. Poverty is a human issue. We are losing so much human potential to poverty." It was at the end of her piece, and it really stood out to me, so thank you for coming. Our next panelist is Henry Cisneros. He's the former HUD secretary. He's also currently the executive chairman of CityView. They build urban housing, so he knows a lot about that issue. Henry, thank you for being here. Bob Woodson, the founder of the Center for Neighborhood Enterprise. I was reading about Bob. Dropped out of high school, later got his GED college degree. A very accomplished man here to talk about, again, education and all the things that go into solving this crisis. Thank you for being here. Michael Rich is the Director of Community Partnerships and Professor of Political Science and Environmental Studies at Emory. He's writing a book right now, is this on the record, public, about empowerment zones. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And finally, Renee Glover, who is the CEO, the longtime CEO of the Atlanta Housing Authority. She created the Atlanta model that the nation has looked at and used of mixed income housing. So guys, thank you very much for being here. So I wanted to start out tonight, I was looking back through Michael Harrington's book, The Other America, which was written 20 years before I was born. So someone asked me tonight, do you think we've improved? And I said, I can tell you what I've learned in the past 29 years, but it's been a crisis that's been going on for a long, long time. But near the beginning of the book, he wrote, this sector, talking about the poor in America, he said, this sector of the American economy has proved itself immune to progress. So that was in 1962. Donna, is that true today?
Well, I think if you look at Johnson's war on poverty and you study it, you see that when we focused on fighting the poverty and not the people, we reduced poverty by 23%. Those dollars, those resources were put into the war in Vietnam, and poverty rates began to climb. So today you see statistics like a child born into poverty today is less likely to get an education than a child born into poverty in the 40s.
Less likely.
So there's a lot of entrenchment, absolutely, and I think a lot of it has to do with our ignorance.
Henry?
Poppy, I think we've made a lot of progress. And I think the tragedy is we know the things that work, and we've forgotten to stay the course. And so we're in danger now of slipping back in some pretty serious ways. But when you think about it, Elderly people are not by majority poor anymore because of things like Social Security. Women have made immense progress in the last number of years. We have a minority middle class that we didn't have before. And we've done things like move people along to college and create home ownership. The country's done very, very well. The poverty rate has actually come down. This recession has been devastating. And the saddest thing for me is the extent to which people forget to do the right thing for people who are poor. And as a result, we have a real danger, which, in my view, is a national security issue. It has to do with how our country prospers or fails.
Bob, is this sector immune to progress? Has it been?
Progress, I think the challenge is that how we define poverty and poor people. I think we tend to generalize too much about it and assume that poverty has to do with people who don't have money. There's a difference between people who are poor and people who are broke. Some people are poor because they do lack opportunity, and once doors of opportunity open, they take advantage of it. They go to school, and they take advantage. There are other people who are poor because of the chances that they take and the choices that they make. And so, therefore, giving money or opportunity to them will have little impact in changing their condition. There's something else that is required before one can. So it's important to make a distinction as we're talking about poverty.
Michael?
I think we've made some progress. I think what's interesting is that many of the ideas that were articulated during the war on poverty are still the ideas that are driving innovative practices today. The challenge is it's the places where it's working are more the exception than the rule. We have lots of interesting, innovative demonstration programs here or there, but it's pretty much a neighborhood here, a neighborhood there, rather than community-wide.
Yeah. What do you think, Renee?
Well, I think we've made great progress, but you have to think about building a strong society. And what happens is that the United States constantly has people coming in for all the opportunities that are here. And the question is, can we have a sustained, shared vision and belief that all people are children of God with unlimited human potential? Because that drives, I think, the political support to continue to invest in things like great communities of opportunity and great educational opportunities. And I think often, just like today, we have a budget deficit, and the real conversation that's going on right now is, should we pull up the ladder? Because it costs too much money to continue to provide opportunities and great education for the people who are going to continue to come. And poverty is not constant with the same group of people. There are people that have fewer resources for a whole bunch of complex reasons. But if we can come up with a shared vision, we can solve this issue.
So I want Donna to tell her story. There was a great PBS documentary, which you should watch, about her and her family. But briefly, Donna, tell your story and then follow it up with, do you believe that poverty is still an invisible nation? And I asked that. We were having a conversation in the green room, and one of the points that was made is that poverty is just not talked about. It's not even that it's, Republicans say one thing, Democrats say another thing. It's just that it's not real poverty. The middle class is talked about a lot right now. But true poverty, being broke, as Bob said. So tell us your story.
I think you're right on. Martin Luther King said, if we're silent about race, there will be racism. And I think the same is true about poverty. You rarely hear the P word. I was born in the deepest poverty in America, and that is generational, which basically means most of my family members can't read and write. So what kind of jobs will you get if you're not literate? And I grew up believing what America teaches, which is everybody starts the same. Everybody has the same opportunity. But I thought that meant everybody lived like us. So I was 28 years old before I ever had any meaningful interactions with people who were making it, who shared their life story, and I was shocked. I was like, what? You lived in one house your whole childhood? You went to one school? You've not been evicted? Really? Your family members didn't get arrested? They don't use super glue to fix their teeth when they hurt? I had no idea, because in this country we are so segregated. I mean, if you just ask yourself, who do middle-class people spend time with, you will begin to understand how that isolation of poverty perpetuates it. So I dropped out of school at 15 to get married. That was normal. That's what everyone did. Education wasn't for people like us. We didn't look right, we didn't talk right. I said ain't every other word. I married, I was going to be a mom, and I figured I would be a really good mom, and I would play with them, and we'd figure out a way to get by. At 26, my marriage ended. My ex-husband had 7th grade, couldn't read and write, high poverty schools. I went on welfare. My welfare check was $408 for me and 2 children. And a lot of people believe people get rich off welfare, but the truth is, today a welfare check for 1 adult, 2 children is $478.
And your rent was $3 something?
My rent was $395. And so I had $13 left after I paid rent, and I got evicted from my house, and my caseworker said, the state's mandating you to money management class. And I experienced that all through my life, just these messages of you're not doing it right, something's wrong with you. So you do internalize, and Paulo Freire talks about how in America, because we don't educate about real causes of poverty, we're the only country in the world that teaches people they're the cause. People internalize it as a personal deficiency. So at 26, I was really privileged to get into a pilot program. And it was interesting because I learned later pilot programs have almost 100% success rate. So I'm about to say, let's just do everything as a pilot. But I was privileged because in that pilot program we got Section 8 housing certificates, and that was huge for me. I was homeless pretty much 28 years of my life. And they really began to help me believe that I was somebody and that I had something to offer, and really began helping me gain self-confidence, which comes before anything else. And then I got my GED and went on to get a doctorate studying poverty all the way. And all of my work is about fighting that evil villain poverty and helping people to separate the people from the poverty so that we're actually fighting real poverty.
And Donna... And Donna has a strong conviction now that education's the way out. She's the example of it. I don't think anyone can argue that. I know it's been argued, especially in politics, but I don't know how you can argue that. She believes that everyone should take a course in Poverty 101 before they graduate from college. I agree with that too. I think we can pull up some numbers here and just go through education, the importance of education and jobs right now, because there is such a jobs crisis. Take a look at the numbers up there when it comes to the dropout rate here in Atlanta and nationally. And then also I want to pull up the unemployment rate, because you can't avoid talking about race when you talk about unemployment, if we can possibly pull it up. But I'll just go through it with you. Take a look at those. So we're looking at 2007, and then March, actually that's 2012. So African Americans went from 8.3% unemployment to 14% today. African Americans have double the unemployment rate of whites in this country, which is absolutely not okay. And a lot of this comes down to where are the jobs and what are people being educated for. I've seen personally on the ground, talking to people that run these companies, the jobs are in engineering, in tech, in science, and that is exactly where America is falling short in education. So I know, Henry, you're very passionate about this. If you could address this, and then also you, Michael.
I'll be brief. I mean, what's happened is the American job market has changed.
Dramatically.
Dramatically. In the 1960s and the 1970s, we were still a country that manufactured, and those were good jobs. You needed to have a strong back, strong arms, work in an automobile assembly plant, work in a steel plant, manufacturing things. And you could make a decent wage. We also had a stronger union structure, so unions protected people and provided some protections and such. Now the American economy's changed completely. Those jobs have gone offshore. They've ceased to exist in the United States. We have a new American economy. It is a bifurcated economy. Part of it is high tech, healthcare, higher education, new media, professional services, international trade, all things that require high education. And the other part of the economy is services. You work in restaurants, you work in custodial work, etc., doing things in the country. And then a lot of other jobs have gone to India and other places. So we have this segmented labor market in which you either have the skills to work at the higher ranks, in which case you can make some money.
But are we educating for the skills?
And or you have no skills and you work for peanuts. And the problem is our educational system is failing us in producing out of the next the growth of our population, much of which is minority. Central city, African American, Latino, and other youth who are not getting the skills they need to participate in that upper part of the economy.
And Bob, you make the point that people are motivated, very motivated, by possibility, right? A free market system, by possibility, capitalism, the dream, not inequity. So this discussion has focused so much around the widening wealth gap. Numbers came out today from the Department of Labor showing that that continues to get bigger. We know that, and the Occupy movement embodied it, but you say it's possibility that
I
drives
think
them.
certainly, I think education is one route. But also, if you, according to David Birch and others at MIT, any group's participation in the American economy, has to do with their small business formation rates. In any healthy economy, you're supposed to generate 2.5 jobs per 1,000 people per year. In the Black and Hispanic community, the business formation rate is more like 3 businesses per 100,000 per year. So it's important when we're talking about poverty to emphasize formation of small businesses that operate in the 70% of all new jobs in the American economy are created not by these corporations, but by small businesses. And you don't have to be, in fact, it's interesting that A students, in terms of as a characteristic of an entrepreneur, A students come back to places like Georgia Tech and teach. C students come back and endow. Because in the market economy, very smart people tend to be very cautious about taking risk where other people don't. So what we advocate in helping low-income people is small business formation, taxi services run by ex-offenders in high-crime areas because they have access and a market advantage over anyone else. So there are other creative ideas.
You've also said that one of the biggest problems is that fundamental elitism is one of the biggest barriers in helping really poor people. And that by that you mean academics, people and think tanks trying to come up with this solution. Your argument is it just hasn't worked for 4 decades.
Again, we have 2 sets of principles, one that operate in the market economy and the social economy. In a market economy, we don't care whether Bill Gates has a degree in computer science. We just want to know, does he produce something that we need and can use? But in our social economy, what we've done with the $15 trillion we've spent over the past 40 years is we have very smart people at our universities and others designing remedies for the poor. We parachute them into these communities with the expectation that the poor participate. When they fail, we never question the intervention. We just say, well, they're worse off than we thought, and we need more money.
And there's this issue of accountability. How do we hold those accountable who fail in that mission and who spend hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money and other money in it? You said to me backstage, in a social marketplace, it's never a scandal to fail people. So that really stood out to me.
Absolutely. I mean, there is no penalty for failing, whether you're a private foundation or the government. You can waste millions in America if it's well managed by well-intentioned people.
Renee, jump in here because you've been at the forefront of this, and you have said and done and practiced that if you continue to concentrate poverty, you will fail this nation. You have to have mixed income housing. You cannot continue concentrating poverty. That will just make it worse from an educational standpoint, a job standpoint. Has progress been made on that front, and do we need to keep doing that to get the solution right? Or is that people who think they know what they're doing parachuting in and trying to fix the problem?
No, I think, first of all, the whole notion of mixed income communities is now a national movement. The real question is, will we have the continued political support? Because the way it works is that the government has to put in a little money that gets leverage, because all of these mixed income communities actually leverage multiple times the investment that's made by the government. And the reason that this works is that there are thousands of studies that say if you concentrate poverty, you create situations where the predators of the world make it too difficult to navigate daily life. And so if you have economic integration, you actually have a better shot at educating kids, because so many of our schools have become crisis centers as opposed to centers where teaching centers where kids are learning and they're aspiring, and you have a different profile of administrators who approach it that way. So this notion, going back to not thinking that poverty is a hopeless situation, but that you're working with individuals who have unlimited human potential, like Donna, like other people. There are thousands of stories where if the opportunities are there structurally, we need to stop creating zip codes of dysfunction and hopelessness.
Yeah.
And we can do it. We have done it. And I think if we continue in that path, that's something that Henry said. You know, we know what works. So if we just looked at the best practices and lessons learned and did more of it, and not do those things that we know with certainty don't work, we could make a ton of progress.
So, Michael, on that point, the Brookings Institution came out recently and said that any neighborhood with a poverty rate of 20% or greater is at risk of significant deterioration. That's only 20%. And I've spent time in New York neighborhoods where it's 90%. And you know, I reported on this story, and we go back each year on this mother and her children. And this, you know, her grandmother was born in the same projects where her mother had her where she lives, where she had her kids. So there is this continued issue. Localize that to Atlanta for us. What do you do about that in Atlanta? Because you're working and looking specifically at a cradle to career model, a ready by 21. How does the government, local businesses, big and small, parents, education, all work together? And I think your argument is that they haven't been necessarily all working together.
Well, I think that the on-the-ground strategies that work best are those that are comprehensive. So you're not looking at isolated programs, you're looking at the big picture. Poverty is a very complicated issue. The pathway out of poverty is different from individual to individual, so we have to not have cookie-cutter programs, but programs that are more comprehensive in focus and can provide the kind of supports and foundations people need to find a pathway out of poverty. But when you go that route, you need not just a spate of programs, you need some mechanism to coordinate that work so there's a holistic strategy and not an ad hoc strategy. So you need some type of coordinative mechanism. For most of this 50-year period or so, we've tried to coordinate from Washington with, you know, interagency task force and the like, but we need to coordinate on the ground, and we need to build the institutional capacity to do that coordination on the ground, and that's a very difficult thing to do, particularly without resources. And then the third thing that we need to have, and Donna touched on this in her remarks, we need to have meaningful participation of poor people in designing the strategies to get out of there. When you bring these three things together, comprehensiveness, coordination, and meaningful participation, and do it in a place-oriented strategy, your opportunities for success are much greater.
Is there any program that any of you know of where really poor people have been involved in creating strategy and it's worked?
One of them is the one that Renee ran, which is the Hope 6 program that transformed 254 of the worst public housing developments in the country, places with names that people know, like Cabrini Green in Chicago. Renee led the effort to transform that in Atlanta. So Atlanta literally is the only city in America where every single one of the old public housing developments is gone. And it's replaced with decent housing, and the people who lived there before are either back or they were given Section 8 vouchers where they can live in neighborhoods where there are jobs. And every one of those initiatives involve the people who live there in the plan.
But
Renee ought to speak to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you can't plan for people. People have to be engaged in the plan, and it made it very rich, and it drove accountability, and it drove the kinds of outcomes. And you would be pleasantly surprised that the things that the families wanted, great schools, safety,
jobs,
beauty, jobs, you know, the whole debate that we have sometimes around a work requirement. Well, the people there were saying, of course we want great jobs and great opportunities because this is about our future, our children, our ability to have access. And growing out of one of those programs, I'll tell you a story that I think is very hopeful. Centennial Place Elementary was created as part of the whole Hope 6 revitalization.
The sciences.
And it is a STEM school.
Yeah.
Adjacent to Georgia Tech.
Georgia Tech was one of the partners, and 49 of the graduates of the inaugural class of Centennial Place Elementary are on their way to Brandeis, Harvard, Penn, Howard, Morehouse, Spelman. Now that is the type of intervention, and each one of those students wants to come back and inspire other children coming behind them.
Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, you know, I hear this about low-income people's participation. I believe we should emphasize their origination of things. I'll give you an example. We worked with resident management and ownership of public housing movement in the late 80s. You had a woman, Kimmy Gray, abandoned by her husband at age 21 with 5 children in public welfare, got off welfare in 3 years, sent all 5 kids to college, mobilized the residents there to drive out the drug dealers, and then pay their rent on time, and they sent 800 other kids from there to college, dramatically reducing and they were on 60 Minutes. Same with Cochran, you remember, in St. Louis.
Yes.
That where residents took over, they managed the laundry room. When it was under the housing authority, they had a lot of security, so the residents, innovation, said, well, who is the toughest kid in Cochran? Well, Tommy Jones. Well, good, his mother will be the manager of the laundry room. Security problems dissolved. Because neighborhood people are innovative, they are social entrepreneurs, and I think some of us who are professionally trained need to learn to be on tap, but not always on top.
Well, and
Donna quickly, and then Henry. Yeah.
I think that one of the things that's happened in our country is we've so dehumanized people in poverty that often they're seen as sort of some subspecies. And
don't recognize that they all look different. And Donna said that, you know, when people would read about you, they would think you were black.
Yeah, so many times people read my bio of growing up in a migrant labor family, and I'm the only family member who's not been incarcerated, and they'll meet me and they'll say, oh, I read your bio, I thought you were black. And I'm like, why? Why do you think I was? Well, we don't hear stories like yours from blonde, blue-eyed people. And I say, why don't you? I mean, we are the majority. Proportionately, when people talk about poverty, they talk about percentages of a population. So you'll see statistics like 62% of Hispanics drop out, 50% of African Americans drop out, 13% of whites drop out, and we go, wow, there's race issues. And absolutely racism is embedded in those numbers, yet which number has the most children? It's the 13%. So what Martin Luther King and Malcolm X both, before they were assassinated, came to include in their movement was the fact that poverty crossed race. And I think united is when we really began to address the core issues instead of fighting each other, which is what I grew up with.
So you made this correlation now twice this evening to the civil rights movement and what we're here today. So I can tell where you come from. And I agree with you that this is the civil rights movement of our time, and it has been for a long time. But what really worries me is I don't see the discussion behind it, or the marches, or the power and the need to change it as much as we did in civil rights. Am I wrong? Do we have that?
I think worse than that. It's not just people are not talking about it. We've actually reversed in our ideals and our commitments.
That we're just saying it's okay?
First of all, you've just heard around this grouping here some very important points. One, we know things that work. We know things that actually work, right? Two, the professor was stating, we know that they're best coordinated at the local level. It's not all about Washington. It's bright mayors and bright local officials, people like Renee making it work. Bob suggested we need to involve the residents. That's absolutely right. The poor people themselves, allow them to originate and imagine and so forth. And Donna focused on the dehumanization. I would go one step further and say, we have in our country allowed a callousness which is unconscionable. We have 500,000 people who sleep on the streets of America's cities every night. In a country this size, that's a larger population than Atlanta, sleeping on subway grates and on sidewalks every single night. It comes to 3.5 million people over the course of a year because they cycle through poverty. I mean, what kind of people are we, if we allow that to exist, right? We dehumanize, we're callous about whether or not we want to pay for it. We say it's somebody else's responsibility. We live a life where we get in our car, we drive out to our suburban house, hit the remote control, go inside, never deal with other folks.
Don't see it.
Don't see it, blind to it. I'm saying it's worse than just not paying attention. We as a country have to care about this. And here's my final point. This is the future of our country. That's what people don't realize.
Right.
If we're in this boat together, and if my end of the boat starts to sink, you better help me because you're going under too. Mm-hmm. And that's what's going to happen in our country. We're going to go under in our competition with the Chinese and with the Indians, economically and otherwise, because we can't afford to have
our way.
Poverty at the level, a waste of talent at the level that we tolerate.
I think what's really the hope, and I do believe there's so much hope. I designed a program called the Navigator Neighbor Program because I knew that the isolation of poverty was really perpetuating it, perpetuating the stereotypes, perpetuating the otherness, so much so that I was doing a teacher in-service and a teacher said that she had a student in her class who was living in a car and she said, I ran into him in a grocery store and went over to him and said, "How are you doing?" And he said, "You shop?" And she said, "I was so surprised by that." And I said, "You are other. And as long as you are other, you will not educate this kid." And so how do we come to that place where I see how I'm like you and you see how you're like me? So I designed this conference for people in poverty, people from working class, immigrant poverty, generational poverty, situational poverty, to really remove the shame of poverty by helping people see that people are not we're the only country in the world that teaches people they're the cause of poverty. I mean, could you imagine a third world country, someone saying, "Hey, if you worked harder in this third world country, you wouldn't be poor." Or maybe if you'd make some better choices in this third world country, you wouldn't be poor. There are very clear, overt understandings that there are true causes for poverty. What can somebody earn? 2/3 of the people in poverty in America, according to census, are not working one job. They're working 1.7 jobs. And I ask thousands of people a week, how many of you know people working more than one job that can't afford their rent? We got to be honest about what people can earn, what could they buy, with that we have a labor market that requires a skill, requires an education, and then how do we build, someone said earlier that education's failing us. I think it's way bigger than education. I love the comprehensive approach because as much as we talk about collaboration, you've got education over here, business over there, social service over here, health over here, and rarely are we sitting down to say, okay, let's see what's in my hands. What's in my hands? What can I do? And so in this conference that I do for people in poverty, I match them with a citizen not in poverty who goes through a Poverty 101 training so that they're not judging, they're understanding, who gives their phone number to say, "I'll call you up and see how you're doing. If you need to know the meaning of a word, I'll help you with that."
Do they? Does it work?
They do. We are in 6 states now, and here's the hope. We've got judges, we've got lawyers, we've got business people saying, "I'll give my number, I'll be a navigator." The hope in thinking that this issue of the complexity can be resolved by one entity or one organization or one person, that's where we're struggling. But when truthfully, when you give people a door in, a way to make a difference, and you give them understanding, we're wired. We are hardwired to help our fellow human beings.
I wanted to get to Michael. Who wanted to
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in here. We kind of got started on the unemployment and the kinds of jobs that are available. Part of the problem is we don't make work pay in America. It is so difficult for people working to support a family, in part because of the kinds of jobs that are available, in part because of the lack of a safety net that gets extended higher up the income ladder here in other countries than it does here. We know what works, and evidence shows that when you make work pay, people get out of poverty.
So when you look at this issue of $8 to $10 an hour, right, and that's well above minimum wage, and then I've heard it so many times from people, but then I lose my benefits, and then I'm really in a bad situation. And you look at the way the government defines poverty, right? It's so hard to look at just these. They have these numbers, and then this many people fall. It doesn't humanize it, but there's a person behind every single number. But the government defines a poverty line for a family of 4 as $22,314,000 a year for a family of 4. Does the reality reflect that measure? Is that at all a measure of where things should stand?
Probably should be about twice that.
Twice that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I really think that, going back to Henry's point, that what bothers me about the tenor of the dialogue today, that we are polarizing. I don't believe, for instance, that poor people are poor because rich people are rich.
That is a very important point.
I believe that there are some rich people to poor people who are no longer poor because rich people have helped them, like the Hershey's, who left their whole fortune to the Hershey School that educates exclusively talented and gifted poor kids and thousands. Doris Buffett in Fredericksburg, Maryland.
She's a wonderful woman.
In her 80s. Gives millions to women coming out of prison, to neighborhood organizations. She says she doesn't contribute to SOBs, symphonies, operas, and ballets. But she gives to people, and she's committed to giving it all away before she dies.
The giving pledge, that is one positive.
But we're too willing to look for villains and victims. That we can't do that. We've got to. You cannot generalize about poor people. There's Bernie Madoff, and then there's Doris Buffett.
Poppy, I just have to. Because I love Bob. We've worked together for 30 years in one capacity or another, and I have great respect for him. But, and I don't think I want to demonize anybody, but the top 1% on average make 26 times.
I'm well aware
what
of
the other 99% make on average. Let me finish.
But make the argument about why that hurts the poor.
I want to. I will. They used to make 10%. Now they make 26 times as much.
So what?
The top 0.1% make 130 times.
Are they taking the jobs? Is that?
No, they're not taking the jobs. But they used to have a tax rate of 70%. It's now 35%, and they want it lower. They wanted 29, they wanted 28, they wanted 27, they wanted 20. There's no money left.
I'm not getting into a political debate here, but I hear you, and I want Renee to jump in.
What I'm saying is,
a quick example.
There isn't enough money.
Okay, I am running this show. Renee.
Okay, there you go. Thank you, Poppy. So here's the deal. The fact of the matter is that we, the American people, can change this if we, the American people, decide that it is important. So, Henry talked about people sleeping on the street, people not having access, and on and on. Well, we need to come together around a vision that says it is unacceptable that children live in poverty. It is unacceptable that we can't figure out how to educate our kids, house our people in decent living environments, health consequences, because if we don't, we will lose the global war.
Absolutely.
And it is about continuing the journey to build a country, to let more people in. We are, as a country, changing dramatically with the demographics. And so if the war is the pie is only but so big and no one else can have opportunity, we will self-destruct. So we've got to have a bigger vision. We've got to have a kinder vision. And it is a business-driven vision because as we make the pie bigger, because we are tapping into the human potential of people that are being written off, this country can remain the best in the world, provided that we take care of our people.
All of them.
I so agree.
And I want to get to Michael on this point. I want to say something to back that up. The World Economic Forum came out this year, and they said that the single biggest risk to the world right now, not just economically, is not terrorism, but it's social inequality. We saw it play out in the Arab Spring. We saw it play out a few blocks from my apartment at Wall Street, Zuccotti Park. I was there the night they got evicted. I watched this happen. We've seen it play out in cities across America. Nouriel Roubini, the economist who's very good at calling things about a year before they happen, like the housing crisis, argued a year ago this could really take this country down, social inequality. So to your point, Henry, talking about why that matters, that you have this disparity, that is one
Poppy,
reason
you are
when you
a
have
smart
enough
lady. You're a smart lady. You work every day touting what Wall Street does and business does, etc. You can't talk about ideals and what we ought to be doing without talking about where the money's going to come from for that. We got to talk about where the money. So there's a real serious conversation that needs to occur. I'm not against rich people making more. I'm just about them recognizing and sharing with the rest of the society, philanthropically and otherwise, right? And setting up a tax structure and doing things like, we have business people who hate unions. Well, unions is the reason why people were paid decent wages.
We're talking about poverty, not taxes necessarily.
This is poverty. We're talking about solutions.
All the same.
Solutions. Let me give you two quick examples. Several years ago, Senator Kerry and Kennedy passed a law that said, well, we ought to tax these rich people, therefore we're going to provide a tax on luxury cars and boats. Fine, it was passed, so rich people stopped buying luxury cars and boats. Technicians, carpenters, all of them got fired, and so what happened, since it was in New England that makes yachts, that law was repealed because it put a lot of people out of work. If we were truly talking about stopping the exploitation of the poor, we can come together and prohibit the predatory lending of these payday lenders who poor people pay 300% interest, but yet athletes like athletes and Montel Williams and Magic Johnson and a lot of elected officials are in the tank with these payday lenders, but no one discusses it. They are the ones who are bilking the poor and not necessarily Wall Street. We need to spend as much time talking about payday lenders as we do Wall Street.
I would agree. But to want to get to you, Michael, and just to back up those numbers, so you look at the housing issue, right, and you look at all the predatory lending that's happened across this nation, and people that took out irresponsible loans and banks that gave them. So it's a shared problem. 1 out of every 361 houses in Georgia is in foreclosure. Nationally, it's 1 in every 662 homes. You've got twice as bad a situation here. And when you look at Atlanta, the Atlanta metro area is the worst performer year over year when it comes to housing prices. So the crisis continues here, absolutely. Michael, I know you had a point you wanted to make.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on Renee's point about national commitment and political will. And I think if we look to Britain, we can see some examples of what happens when you have that. In the early 90s, Prime Minister Tony Blair made a commitment that Britain would reduce poverty by half in 10 years and eliminate it in 20 years. And they did that primarily by making work pay. They implemented a national minimum wage that was pegged at about 60% of the median wage in Britain. In America, the minimum wage is about 30%, so a significant bump from what we have here. They made it by investing in families. They put significant child tax credit to make it put more income in the pockets of families with children. They invested in early learning, education, a lot of programs and activities to support families. And they've been successful. They cut poverty in half. And primarily, the reason that they cut poverty in half is that wages and income increased at the lower ends of the income distribution to help lift those families out of poverty because work was made an attractive option for families. In America, all of the income growth has been at the very high ends of the income distribution. The low ends have been stagnant or in some instances actually declining.
I'm watching Bob.
You actually believe that Europe is our model? Greece?
Oh, great. Now we get to get to the socialist agreement.
I mean, are you using Europe as a goal for America? They're running out of money and they're coming to us?
No, I said if there's a national commitment to address poverty and do it in ways that support work, you can reduce poverty.
You can do it, and we all can go broke, and all of us will be poor.
They did not go broke. They shifted expenditures.
You better take charge of this.
Do you have to tax it? But look, I mean, you also have NHS. You have you have people paying 50% of their income in taxes. Is that what we need in this country to do it that way?
No. But, Poppy, it is unreasonable to say we're going to have a conversation about poverty, but if you want to talk about taxes and income distribution, that's politics. We don't want to talk about that. These things are all wrapped up together. They're all wrapped up together.
But we ought to have an honest discussion about it.
Okay.
We should have an honest discussion about all of that.
For Michael's model to work, or for us to follow that model at least, do we have to have a significantly higher tax rate across the board in America?
Of course.
No. We don't have to have a significantly higher tax rate, but we do have to make better judgments about how we allocate resources.
I think, it's interesting. When the Iraq War started, our National Guard built 100 homes in 8 days. You think we could use some of those homes here? I don't think we're using the resources and the capacity that we have to fight poverty, and we have such a mentality of there's not enough. Well, what do human beings do when they believe there's not enough? We hoard, we start deciding who's worthy and who's not worthy. Right. So the truth is, last year, in the height of the recession, we spent $26 billion on Disney princess merchandise. We spent $33 billion on Disney princess merchandise, $33 billion on pet toys. We spent $1.5 billion on video games in 1 month. There's enough. We spend $32,000 per human being that we put into cages, and we are #1 in the world for putting humans in cages.
We also vote down school bond issues because we don't want to pay the property taxes associated with schools. So we have a generation of young people who need improved schools, and we're not providing the resources.
You can go to any city in the country, call up a real estate agent and say, where are the good schools? And they will tell you. That means we all know what?
But Henry, there is no correlation between how much we spend on education and outcomes for kids. My city of Washington has the highest per capita expenditure in public education and 48th in outcomes for kids.
I do know
We've got to learn to invest more wisely.
You cannot get to better education if you're not willing to pay for it. Right. You cannot get to better education.
But what is the correlation between how much we spend and what do we produce?
We've got to spend more on teachers, the hardest working people in American life. And
does it produce superior outcomes for kids? Can you go city by city and look at the amount of money we spend per capita on education and say, if we spend more, we get better education?
But you got to also say, where are those kids sleeping? What are they eating? Right. Are their parents getting their medicine? Are they healthy? Do they have access to treatment if they're struggling with a disease?
Again, I think we start the conversations at the wrong point. And I think what we need to agree as a society is what is acceptable and what is not. And once we can agree on those things that we are setting out to do, then we can figure out how to pay for them. We often start the conversation, taxes may go up, this might happen. We haven't even agreed on a vision for America.
How do we get there? How do we make people care enough? How do we make them feel it? Because it's one thing for us to sit here and us to say it, and I believe we all believe it. But for a lot of Americans that are just getting by, they're thinking about where their next paycheck is coming from, what they're doing. How do we get all Americans to care and fight aggressively for what's acceptable and what's not?
That's a very, very hard question. Because
and we've got to get more engaged and more involved. And we also have a bunch of great practices, just like schools. Mm-hmm. We know what the good schools are, and if you were to analyze, deconstruct why those are good schools, you would start seeing some common themes, like having great principals who operate as CEOs in the schools, like longer school days, like a curriculum that actually charges up and enlivens and energizes and excites the kids about learning. I mean, there are things that we know. The question is, can we replicate the things that we know and not just do a whole hodgepodge of things? And then when things get tough, we run and divide and start talking about the things that at the end of the day don't matter.
You know, when I was in poverty, I would get my light shut off. It was a regular thing. And I would go to a helping organization. I would say, could I get some help turning my lights back on? And they would say, well, we can help you with $25 if you can go find some other organizations to help you with the rest. And once you have that, come back to us and then we'll write you a check. Now I train social service providers and I say, why are we asking people in crisis driving illegally, cars that shouldn't be on the road, to coordinate our human services? I mean, we have such a fragmented approach to addressing poverty, and you can't address poverty. We have to move away from this mentality of it's not my job to if not me, then who, and really saying what's in my hands, what can I do, and then who do I know? Because that's how we get everybody engaged.
Henry, you had a point you wanted to make, and then we're going to go to Q&A. So if you have questions, I think, do we have a microphone there, or people just raise your hand from the?
The only thing I was going to say is, I understand what Renee is saying about how we have to have a vision, but we don't have a vision right now, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. This country is divided. 51-49 or 50-50, red, blue, every other way that we're divided, aging versus younger. We're going to have to find a new dialogue in this country to explain to each other how we're all in this boat together.
But I don't think we're a selfish country or a selfish people.
Really?
We're very generous.
I don't. I truly don't. I truly don't. I think right now we may be acting that way, but it sounds like you don't have hope that we can get that vision.
I am a hopeful person. I'm an optimistic person. I have been all my life. I'm busted right now.
They all agree with you.
I'm heartbroken. I've never seen this country behave this way before, and it is so dangerous. It is so dangerous the way we're behaving.
We've got to stop pitting people against one another.
Yeah. Okay. Questions, please. If you could just say your name and where you're from.
My name is Winston Cunningham. I'm from the Tampa Housing Authority. We drove all the way here, Renee, just to hear you talk, so glad to see you again. But seriously, I get tired of people coming together, and everybody's got a solution, but we won't be honest with the public. We started the whole globalization back when we started to outsource everything, and finally it hit. Now you go to Detroit, where my sister lived, and it's a ghost town. You go to any small town in this country where all the manufacturers left, it is a ghost town. And here we are sitting up here talking, pontificating about all the things we know are wrong. The business have convinced us that in order for them to sustain themselves, they have to find the cheapest place to go. And in America, many of the politicians are not honest enough or strong enough to tell the truth. Renee, my question to you, you've made a significant change in how public housing operates. You said to the city of Atlanta, public housing has failed, and I'm tearing that shit down. And what happened to the families? Because people believe you not only took the hard approach to tearing that shit down, you also got rid of the families and you didn't do anything about it. Talk about your 8 schools. Talk about the fact you got a Tiger Woods golf course in one of your former properties. Tell us about the need to have the combination of work, health, and housing all combined together so families can begin to see that there is a possibility. We spent billions on housing because somebody told us back in 1940 that you put a poor person in a house, that's all you got to worry about. They still have to get the lights turned on. They still got to learn to follow the lease. And finally they got to know that in America you have to work in order to survive in this country. Nobody's going to continue, as Brother Woodson is saying, nobody's going to continue to give you a check. So talk about that for us, because I'm so impressed with what you've done.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it is about community building. And so part of the challenge is coming up with a comprehensive approach. So it's not just housing, it's education, it's health, it's green space, it's recreation, and it's also raising the standards and expectations. You know, there's a lot of discussion about the bigotry of low expectations. And that's because we look at people who are not like ourselves and say, they're not capable. Well, the fact of the matter is that the reason that the guiding principle that guides all of our work is that all people are children of God with unlimited human potential. That means that we must expect things of other people. People expected things of us. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I know it wasn't a question about whether I was going to school. I knew that if I didn't go to school, I was going to get killed. So, I mean, and that was the strongest showing of love, because there was something expected in the bargain. And so these comprehensive building, community building solutions are important, because it's not just one thing, it's all of it. And I do think we can replicate these things. They have been replicated all across America, but it does come down to, do we have the political will to continue to do the things that we know will work, can work, and must work, so that every human being in this country and all over the world has a shot. That's why we were born, and that's why we're here. We've got to figure out how to make that happen. We can't afford to write off a whole percentage of people and say we can't afford for them to have access to opportunity.
This notion, because my whole life people said, well, you got to work harder, work harder. We worked from 3:30 in the morning until the evening, many days. It didn't matter. We still got evicted. We still went hungry. So I think this notion of all you got to do is work hard. The labor statistics show a person who takes a minimum wage job, who is uneducated, unskilled labor, go back and find them 10 years later. They're earning on average $2 an hour. No, hard work isn't even a variable in the labor statistics. It can't be, because then we would have to explain who works harder, the migrant labor worker or the person in their cube, person cleaning the hotel or the person in their office. 2/3 of the people are working, and they're working hard. And so if we don't recognize that piece, I think we tend to go back to this idea that they're the problem, they're the problem, they're the problem. I see people working hard all over our country and not able to afford both food and electricity.
I want to get to the next question. Yes?
Hi, Nancy Flake Johnson, Urban League of Greater Atlanta. And I think it's a combination of things. I really hear good things from each of you. But I think it's got to work from top down and bottom up. And if we can get our leadership, our legislative leaders, our business community, our government to work in unison, to understand that as we lift those that have the least, everybody wins. And the reason everybody wins is because there's less strain on the system, because people become empowered and self-sufficient. They're able to then own and purchase homes. They pay property taxes and taxes through their wages. And then Georgia Power wins, because now people can pay their power bills, and Walmart wins because people are shopping more, and small businesses win because those in the community can. So as opposed to looking at our citizens, our families who are in poverty as a problem, we ought to be looking at them as an asset, an underdeveloped asset. And that's really what Renee is saying. We've got all this untapped potential in our people. So how do we drive a human development agenda, a human capital agenda, nationwide, starting wherever we can? Renee started where she was, within the Housing Authority. Urban League does it every day. With anybody who walks in that door, we try to help them address whatever their holistic issues are so they can move up an economic ladder. And so the good news is, I don't know if this is a question, but I'm sorry.
I hear, is your question in there, how do we get there?
Yeah, how do we get there? And I'll give you some examples. I mean, we're passing laws that are making it harder on people in poverty instead of building people up. Hope Scholarship, accessibility. Now, instead of having a C average to go to college, you got to have a be average to get that scholarship. Well, there's nothing wrong with incentivizing people to get higher grades, but if the idea is get more people in college. To take the GED test, it used to be $95. There's a process in play. It'll be $250.
I want.
What sense does that make? So I know it's not a question, but I just wanted to.
I hear your question.
Okay.
And I want Bob to address it because I think her question is, how do we get there? How do we get to a point where human capital and raising people up for the betterment of business, society, everything is the top point?
Well, first of all, what I found a little troubling about the dialogue thus far, we keep talking about, again, poor people as they're only poor because they lack opportunity. They don't get enough of working. There are a lot of people who are not in the workforce because they can't pass the drug tests. They can't have. So we've got to invest in those initiatives that helps to transform the attitudes, belief, and behavior of the poor. Or provide treatment. We stopped a gang from marauding in public housing, 53 murders in a 5 square block area in 2 years. We went in and got the leadership so that violence went down. We didn't have a gang murder in 12 years. Then the community is able to take advantage of this. Property values go up. We get jobs. But you can't just assume that people are just poor because they lack opportunity. They have to be told that you have to pick yourself up. That's a part of it.
I think I have to say this, because when I first started teaching and speaking on poverty, people would say, yeah, but Donna, they're all drug addicts and alcoholics and they're sex offenders and they're domestic violence people and they're child abuse. And I would say, wait a minute, has anyone here ever met a middle-class alcoholic? Anybody here ever heard of a wealthy drug addict? Anybody here? And what I started looking at was what are the real, see, those issues aren't poverty issues. I used to bring in celebrity magazines and say, look what he did, look what she did, look what they did. You know, we had a judge who beat up a wife in my city. You could talk about the governor of Illinois, or we could talk about the Catholic priest scandal. I mean, you can talk about all kinds of issues where you see issues of domestic violence, sex. They cross the barriers of class and worldwide.
Bob's point.
However, you go into the community and here's the real poverty issue. I'm addicted to methamphetamines, which is a severe addiction destroying families across the nation. What you find is this nation's answer to meth is jail. When I train drug and alcohol counselors, I say, is jail going to cure meth? I've yet to have one go, yeah, it's the answer. But you look for programs where people in poverty can access them. I find very few. If I do find any, they're like 5-day rehab for meth, or maybe 30 days with a 9-month wait list. So someone gets into a 30-day rehab program for meth, they get out, what do you think is going to happen? They're going back because the literature says it takes a year of intensive rehab to be free of that drug. And then we say to human beings, you didn't love your kids, you didn't want a better life, instead of saying, wow, we gave you 30 days and that addiction takes a year intensive rehab. So I think the poverty issues are access.
Poppy,
Henry, weighing in on that.
You asked earlier, how do we climb our way out of this? We're tonight at a forum that's sponsored in part by a Center on Civil Rights and Human Rights. As recently as 1965, this country passed a Voting Rights Act when there was unfairness with respect to voting, a Civil Rights Act when there was unfairness in civil rights here in the American South. And we have to regain the sense of aspiration and inspiration and optimism, belief, ideals, to address ourselves to the question that this lady did, which is how do we commit to education and human capital and investment in people? We can do this. We can do this again. That's the key to addressing poverty in America.
Next question, and I know everyone's got a lot of very intelligent comments, which we love. You can talk to our panelists afterwards, but you know, it's news and it's time, and let's go. Questions, please.
Thank you. Rob Welsh, 303 Community Coalition. My question is this. What opportunity I'm a big data person, so in terms of using data, what opportunity does geospatial analytics and using data indicators of these huge concentrations of poverty across America overlaid with other data have, or potential to have, to help kind of coordinate and collaborate, greater partnerships with all of these various silos, policy silos that we kind of talk about separately?
That's a good. Michael, do you want to address that?
I'd love to address that question. I think there are tremendous opportunities there with the technology and the accessibility of that technology. We now can have a better understanding of where the problems are at, so we can better target our resources. The challenge is being able to assemble those data sets in a way that allow us to do that kind of planning and diagnosis and monitoring. And it's a huge challenge to get that information out of the government agencies that hold the data, in part because some of the technology, kind of the lowest rung on the technology ladder, typically tends to be government, and especially local government. So it's very difficult to get access to that data, but once you do have it, it can be a very powerful tool for fostering the collaborative, comprehensive, neighborhood-based poverty approaches, because we can see where the issues are concentrated, and we can bring people together to talk about it.
That's a really interesting point. You know, the number we in the news focus on every month, is the unemployment number. That number is not at all a good reading of what's actually going on. It doesn't include anyone who's not looking for a job, who's given up, who's not included in the workforce, and yet that's our headline number. So I wonder if people did see more of the data, more entrenched, where it's happening, how it's happening, what the actual unemployment rate, or arguably just as important, the underemployment rate in this country is. I think data is so important. That's a great question. I see you sitting right there. That's a very great point. Next question.
Yes, John Cummings from Atlanta. Can we win this battle without addressing the capitalist system as it stands now? The 1%, they have lobbyists to help them with the tax structure. They just kicked down the Buffett rule. They was asked to pay 39. I think you addressed it. But when you have the top 1% only like 56% of the total wealth in this country, poor people don't have lobbyists to keep their taxes down. Okay? They're paying 45% taxes. Okay? They don't have loopholes like the rich who pay 15%, and most of their income is capital gains. So that is creating a wider gap between the rich and the poor, the have-nots. And just another quick thing that I want to bring up is that a week ago they had to pass a law, the stock law, for insider trading with Congress. That law should apply to them to begin with. You got to set a separate law because Congress, and people don't know this, have a 63% on average better returns than the public because they have access to insider trading.
But without getting into the very complex Stock Act, there's a great 60 Minutes piece on it that actually sparked this. You can watch. His question is, can we progress? Can we fix this with capitalism?
Yes.
Can we fix it? But I also want to, some of the taxes numbers, I just want to set the record straight here. Most poor Americans do not pay federal taxes, and most wealthy people do pay in the 30% bracket. That said, there are a number of loopholes, and there are, if you make your money off capital gains, off investments, then you are paying 15% max. But I just want to set the record straight on taxes and sales tax, which is a very important point. Remember 999 and
No, I was just going to add, they do pay taxes. It's just not income taxes.
Right.
You know, there's sales tax, payroll
I'm just talking
tax,
income taxes. Just setting the record straight on income taxes.
We can work with the capitalist free enterprise system. It's the best system that's been devised. Combined with democracy, it creates freedom. But the one condition is the government has to play a courageous role of setting the rules and keeping a level playing field. And when they allow lobbyists, for example, to allow the banks to get away with whatever they want when a legislation is being written, or when the Supreme Court allows people to make unlimited personal contributions, then the rules are violated, and we don't have the system is not fair at that point.
Renee.
So a key role for the government is set the rules and keep a level playing field.
Fair capitalism, and that's your point. Renee.
And there's a wonderful book about the CEO of Starbucks who talks about moral capitalism.
Yeah.
And
it's called Onward, if you want to read it.
Oh, thank you for reminding me of the title. But the point of it is that I think that our large corporations can have other goals than strictly maximizing shareholder returns. So, for example, if we want to have a larger base of opportunities in companies, rather than outsourcing the jobs, there may be a commitment to say, we're going to do it at a competitive price, but in this country. I mean, I think that all of those things have to work together, because if you take anything to the extreme, it starts turning on itself. And I think that we've got to, again, as a larger society and community, come together around a set of common values that look like we're not going to accept people living on the street, children not being educated, and on and on and on. And everyone has a role in that and will contribute to the success of it.
You know, Thomas Jefferson said the greatest injustice is to treat unequals equal. And I think that quote in today's current conversation is something we need to keep in mind. I heard one scholar say we have socialism for those who have and capitalism for those who don't. And I thought, yeah, you know, that's right, because when I was poor, I'd have like $2 in my bank account and they would take it. And then once I got a little bit of money in there, they'd give me a little more. And I can find a free meal almost any day of the week now that I'm not in poverty. But when I was in poverty, we went hungry. So I think recognizing these differences in our communities is part of addressing it. And I think you can have people starting businesses with micro. We could do some of the things we're doing abroad, and really they could apply debt forgiveness, micro enterprise loans. There's so many things we could do that would build the human capital.
Bob, does anyone have any confidence if we raise the income tax rate to 70% on the rich? Does anyone have confidence that the government then would take that money and give it to the poor and relieve poverty? Does anyone have any confidence that that's what would happen?
No one's arguing.
Since we are talking about fairness to the poor and how we help, does anyone here believe that the way you balance the scales is to take money from the people up here and that the government will effectively help those down here?
No one is arguing for that, and it's a fake argument.
Well, tell me why then.
Because what people are arguing for is children not having to sleep on the streets in America, and we can do that without having to raise.
Do you have confidence that if you raise the money, the taxes on the rich, that's how the money will be spent by the government?
I would rather have the government taking children off the streets than.
Are they doing it now?
They're working hard at it. And we've made good progress.
We're not talking about working hard at it. I'm talking about, are they doing it?
Next question, please.
This is a fine segue, actually, because I want to bring up a point that you all agreed upon.
Can we get your name and where you're from?
Sure, I'm David from Atlanta. You all agreed upon we have to get the people of means to empathize with people without means, the poor. So I was wondering maybe you could talk about mandatory public service like they do in Germany or Israel, and how that might be a means to help people from the middle and upper class empathize better through a year, say, of public service with folks who don't have.
How old are you?
28.
This is why I love millennials, and I am part of, but it's been proven that millennials not only want to succeed and do well, but want to give back and see their work in some way do that. And by the way, that is the subject of the next CNN Dialogues in the fall. But to his point, why not require people to do more public service? Would that help, Bob, maybe more than giving more money to the government?
I think providing incentives for people works better than requiring them to do anything. Providing them incentives to do so. But you're not going to do this by vilifying them and cussing them out and then beg them cuss them out at breakfast and then beg them for dinner.
Incentive, you don't have to go to work, go help.
You can't do that.
Okay.
It doesn't work.
But it is about raising awareness, and there may be other effective ways to do that. Not that public service isn't good, but there may be other ways to raise awareness. And there's been conversation over the last decade or so about civic journalism, to pay more attention to reporting good that's happening in communities, and not, you turn on the local news and it's one crime after another for 20 minutes. I said local news, okay? And look at the newspapers and things like that. So the kind of good work that is happening is not being lifted up. The kind of suffering that's happening is not being lifted up. And the way you build momentum for change is raising awareness, and we need to find more effective ways to do that.
I think we do need, I'm sorry.
I was going to say a wonderful program, Habitat for Humanity International.
Which you're now working.
Yes, I'm on that board, and so is Henry. And it is a great coming together of volunteering and helping and raising money. And I think the great thing that happens during the volunteer part of the work is that there is awareness, and then there's caring about people across the world. I mean, I think fundamentally people are good, and I think they want to figure out where the entry points are. All of the divisive political debate is what turns people off. And I think that if we could, again, leverage those things that work and that appeal to our hearts and our minds, I think we can absolutely overcome any challenge that confronts us as a nation.
That's true. Probably there's a lot to be said for young people being exposed to other people different than themselves and to taking on some volunteer responsibilities. One option that's been proposed is to make it an aspect of going to college. While you're in school, you have to do community service as some sort of extracurricular credit kind of activity, or even requirement for graduation has been proposed. I mean, think of it. The generation that fought World War II and learned about America and its ideals by fighting for its freedom came back and became the greatest generation that built the great society. And so there's a lot to be said for personal knowledge and personal engagement.
That's true. Good point.
Good evening. My name is Janet Hidalgo Russell. I am a second-generation Hispanic American and a college graduate. I raised 2 daughters alone as a single mother, and I live in Roswell, Georgia. Mr. Cisneros, I disagree with you. I think college is too late to have people taking community service. It needs to start in the 4th grade. It needs to become part of your culture, part of your personality, and part of your family ethic. If you wait till college, you've lost them. I just have one brief statement because they told me you're running out of time. There's more than poverty of money is one thing, but poverty of low expectations is another. And I think you need to somehow address the issue of how people that are ground down by poverty don't really expect much. And they don't know how to achieve it because they're so ground down and tired. That's one. The question is, how do you think putting people in homes and giving them jobs or trying to educate them, how are you going to help lift them up to have higher expectations in our great country? Because I spend half my life around the world in developing countries, and this is the greatest country. The one word you hear all over the world is, when you ask about America, the word is opportunity. It's the same from everywhere I go. So how do we offer the expectation of opportunity to our most impoverished?
How do you lift their...
I would like to address this. I would like to just say, think about, okay, so we graduate people from college without Poverty 101. I've asked thousands of people, have you had the course History of Poverty in our country? I don't see hands. We don't know, in Pennsylvania it was illegal to be poor in the 1700s. We don't know, most people don't even know we had a war, and they'll say we couldn't win it, when in fact we were winning when we focused on it. So there's such ignorance about poverty. So you look at third world countries, and the thing that they're doing, and I travel and I work, I train the entire justice system in Trinidad and Tobago. I work abroad, and I see this consistent theme. There isn't the blaming. There isn't it's your fault that you're in poverty. And they're taught that America is the land of opportunity. So if they immigrate here, they come here with a 4-letter word, hope. Yet what if you're born in the land of opportunity and you see people work hard your whole life and no one moves up? People make choices between rent and food, even though they're working. You internalize the poverty. And Paulo Freire, he's brilliant. He writes about this stuff. It's called internalized personal deficiency. And if I'm deficient, you can put opportunities in front of me all day long. What's the point of trying? So it takes unraveling that shame, rebuilding that hope, reducing that isolation, and beginning to help people who are that beaten down by that evil villain poverty to see what's right about them. And I think that's really what you were speaking to very eloquently.
Bob, and then Renee.
The first thing I think we can do is stop all these failure studies of poor people. Traditionally, what we do is we go into low-income communities. We want to know how many people are dropping out of jail on drugs. And then we take these demographics and get foundation money and get solutions, and we parachute them in. What we need to do is go into those low-income communities, do capacity studies. Find out how many people have kids are not dropping out of school, in jail, and drugs, and asking them. They are the really poverty experts. But we don't do that, and we need to come in and find out what is the secret of their success, and then what can we do to incentivize, how can we help them to influence others in their community to adapt their strategies, and then we can begin to talk about how those of us that have money, technical support, build institutions created by these indigenous experts and begin to develop solutions that are bottom up and inside out, and not the way we're doing it now.
Renee?
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that we did with our community building efforts is that we actually invested in the families with long-term coaching and counseling to change the mindset and that feeling of being beaten down, because it's very harsh in this country with everything being so fragmented and difficult. And that single investment, and it would generally take anywhere from 3 to 5 years, we saw huge progress. And again, it comes back to the unlimited human potential of human beings. So a little bit of investment yields tremendous output. And there's not a single person who has come out of those conditions whose first consideration isn't, I want to go back and bring someone else along.
That's
true. That's a good point.
And the ripple effects are so profound.
Tremendous.
You know, I am the first ever in the history of my family to go to college. Now I have 2 brothers, one who spent most of his life in a cage, who have bachelor's degrees. I have multiple cousins who grew up with illiterate parents. One came to live with me at 15. She couldn't read and write. She had no schooling. By 19, she had an associate's degree. Then she got her bachelor's, her master's. Last fall, she was accepted into a doctoral program. My family members say things like, Donna did it? We can do that. Because the thing that you got to learn in this country is that it's not, I mean, I'm a fluke. I'm a fluke that happened into a pilot program. They happened to be surrounded by 4 people in that program who believed in me, who provided me housing. The group 2 that came through that program that I went through, there was no housing available. And I went back to speak to them, and they were like, you got housing? Your mom watched your kids? Your brothers fixed your car? See, I know my privileges. I know my advantages. I'm not super smart. I'm not superhuman. Their potential, you're so right. The potential in our communities is profound at all ages. I have people say to me, I'm 50, Donna, what could I do? I say, you could be 54 with a bachelor's degree, 54 without one. Time going to go by anyway. And you live in a labor market that demands it.
I like that. I like that. We are out of time, but I just wanted to see if any of our friends in the front row who were so brave to be part of that video and share their stories, if any of you had any questions. And I apologize to the people who've been waiting in line, but you can talk to our panelists after. Did any of you guys have any questions by chance?
It's less of it's more of an observation.
What's your name?
Giovanni Bazan. I'm 21 years old. I actually live in Chris Kidd Summit Trail, which is a income-based housing through the Atlanta Housing Authority, so much thanks to you. Because if it was not for that support system or network, I would still be homeless, which is how I got into the program. I would just like to say, to piggyback, one of the statements was made was ask the indigenous experts, or default to the indigenous experts. And I mean, I think that's so profound, because when you think of the concept of nothing about us without us, you know, we're deliberating about how to ultimately galvanize an entire community or entire population that have been impoverished not only by circumstances or by generation, but by a mindset that captivates us and that keeps us from being able to aspire to ultimately achieve to different heights. So I think by defaulting to the indigenous experts, by defaulting to the people who have been impoverished, who have experienced that homelessness, who have made 2 meals out of ramen noodles. I mean, I had ramen noodles with ketchup, that's spaghetti. And then I would take the chicken broth and put it in water and there's soup. So, I mean, it's innovative, like I heard before in the conversation. So I think by defaulting to those indigenous experts and by doing those case studies, another statement that was made was in regards to how the media highlights the atrocities, the travesties, the unfortunate circumstances. And I think by also focusing on those positive aspects, by going in and saying, well, what is working, and how can we capitalize on what is working? How can we build on that and develop on that? Because obviously there's a foundational support there that's working, that's being manifested for the development of the community. And I think that's something else that we need to do. And the final thing I would like to say, having been through poverty, situational poverty, and I know, obviously by perception you can't immediately tell that I was impoverished or that I still struggle with poverty. But like I said in the documentary, it's one paycheck away, it's one job from being back in poverty again, or not having a meal, or whatever the case may be. And so I think it's just absolutely imperative for us to help lift each other up, and not to deem each other as being, oh well, they're less fortunate than I am, and I'm better off, so let me just focus on myself. But it's about sharing that knowledge with each other and helping to ultimately lift each other up. Right. So thank you.
Thank you. Final one of the night.
Hi, my name is Erica Kovac. I'm from Atlanta. My question is, how do you differentiate between the people who really want help and the people who are just taking advantage of the government? I come from a middle-class family, and for 6 years now, I guess I'm what you call situational poverty. For 6 years now, I've been living in it, and I know from my experience that the only way to get out of poverty is to truly want to.
That's right.
There are opportunities given to the poor, and I think a lot of the generational poverty community, they're so used to living that way that they don't know that a higher way of living is so much better, and that they can actually achieve that if they actually do want better for themselves and take advantage of the opportunities that are given to them. So the money that is going into, just say, like food stamps and welfare, things like that, I have met many people in these 6 years living in poverty that that's the way they live. That is their lifestyle, is to take advantage of the government and the money that they're getting. And so much money is wasted. So how do you differentiate,
Well, your question is an important one. And what we believe you do by going into these communities and find someone with your attitude, you then become a moral mentor and a character coach to your peers. Because if they see you aspiring, getting up on time, going to apply for a job, and you're drug-free, you become a witness to them that it is possible to live in that community and be elevated out of it.
Yeah.
So you are the agent of change that motivates others. And we need to hold you up rather than hiring some professional counselor to come in. We need to employ people in that communities who are living witnesses that transformation is possible.
Well,
you are the expert.
I also believe we have to look at, in every segment of society are people who take advantage. I mean, look at the con artists in the white-collar crime. There's those issues occur in all classes. But I'd also... I'd like to be very, very clear that somebody who believes that welfare is the only hope, how sad is that? How horrid is it that person has been beaten to a place where they believe that's all there is $478 a month for the rest of your life. That is a tragedy. So what I believe is we take that person and we ask them, what do you like to do? And we start looking for little skills, little small successes that we can show them, you're more than this, you're more than this. But I think as long as we continue with this big myth that, oh, you can fraud the welfare and have a big party, you know, you get $60 if you have a baby. And who here has a baby? Could you take care of a baby on $60 a month? So again, the stereotype is that you don't want it. If a human being says they don't want it, that's a beaten, curled up human being. If a human being says they like living on the streets, that's a curled up human being. So I think we're getting at some of the societal things where how do we treat people with mental health issues in our country?
I've got to wrap up quickly, Michael, very quickly, Renee, and
Sure. I was just going to say, in a situation like that, you don't want to necessarily walk away from the adults, but you do want to focus on the children. And you may not be able to pull that adult out of poverty or incentivize that adult to climb out of poverty, but I think we do have an obligation to try to help the children escape from poverty.
Stop the cycle. Renee.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you have to take the long view, and the real win is with the children. And so if you start penalizing what you perceive as some abuse here and there, then you're lost. Because the fact of the matter is that it's very complex, and we should be focused on the future. And I believe this problem is absolutely solvable. We've got best practices. We can come to a common vision, because I do believe that people in America care enough about their brothers and sisters, not regardless of how we sound and look at times, and we must solve this problem, or we will become a declining country.
Final word, Mr. Cisneros. Because I stopped you so many times.
You did,
I know.
I'm sorry. I would just say, as a country, we have to hit a reset button. And that button is, we have to realize we're all in this together. Here's the problem. The population that's coming up is African American and Latino population. Children are becoming more numerous. The population, that's the fastest growing segments of the American population. If people oppose bond issues for schools because they don't want to pay for minority kids, if they demonize those folks and say they're on welfare, we're not going to help, etc., then this country has a great big problem, because we're going to have a large number of people who are undereducated, who are in poverty, and we're not going to have a solid middle class. We absolutely have to figure out, we're in this together. It is poverty, it is also race and ethnicity. We've got to fix this.
Thank you, guys. I'm so sorry. I have to wrap it up. Thank you so much to Emory University. Thank you so much to the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. Thank you so much to my employer, CNN, for thinking this is important, and it is to all of us. And I can tell you, as a journalist in the media, we're going to keep covering this, and also the positive stories, too. I think that was a very important point. Thank you guys so much. Donna, Henry, Bob, Michael, Renee, thank you so much. What? The next CNN Dialogue is on millennials, and it is about the millennial generation changing the way we do business. It is this fall. I hope to see you all there. Thank you.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.